In business history, there are mistakes that crash stock prices, mistakes that drive customers away. And then there are the more dangerous ones. The kind of mistakes that make a company realize it never truly understood why people loved it in the first place. In 1985, Coca-Cola, one of the strongest brands on earth, made a move that looked smart, modern, and almost inevitable on paper. The company decided to improve its most important product. Not the packaging, not the advertising, not the slogan. It decided to improve Coca-Cola itself. The logic seemed airtight. The competition was getting stronger. The market was changing. Taste tests were sending worrying signals. And at some point inside the executive rooms of Coca-Cola, an idea started to feel rational. If people in blind taste tests preferred a sweeter drink, if Pepsi looked younger, sharper, and more relevant, if the old formula no longer felt untouchable, then maybe it was time to replace a classic. And at that moment, a multi-billion-dollar corporation made one of the most dangerous mistakes any great brand can make. It decided that it was selling a beverage, when in reality, it was selling a habit, a memory, a ritual, a small piece of people's lives. And when Coca-Cola tried to tamper with that using research, charts, and confidence, America reacted as if someone had tried to take away not a soft drink, but a piece of its past. To understand why this story exploded the way it did, you first have to understand what Coca-Cola actually was by the mid-1980s. It was not just a successful product. It was not even just a global brand. It was a symbol of stability. The red color, the white script, the contour bottle, all of it had long since stopped being mere design. It had become part of everyday culture. Coca-Cola was not only selling flavor, it was selling the feeling of a familiar world where certain things stayed the same. For millions of people, Coke sat quietly in the background of life, at family gatherings, at baseball games, in movie theaters, after school, at gas stations, on summer afternoons, during road trips and picnics. That was its true power. Not that the drink was objectively superior, not that people had chosen it after carefully comparing features, but that Coca-Cola had been woven into human routine for decades. Once a brand lives next to people long enough, it no longer belongs entirely to the company. Some control shifts to the audience. People begin to feel that the thing belongs partly to them too. And that is a crucial point. A small brand can experiment freely. A giant brand has far less permission to tamper with its foundation, because eventually the product stops being just a product. It becomes emotional territory. And when a company tries to improve something like that without the audience's consent, it no longer feels like innovation. It feels like intrusion. Coca-Cola did not fully understand that yet, but it was about to learn it in the most painful way possible. The problem was not that Coca-Cola had suddenly become weak. The problem was that for the first time in a long time, it started to feel vulnerable. Throughout the 1970s and into the early 1980s, Pepsi was running an aggressive, clever, and highly effective attack. It positioned itself as younger, fresher, more modern, and most importantly, it found a way to challenge Coca-Cola not just on image, but on taste. That was the power of the Pepsi Challenge, the famous blind taste tests in which people often chose Pepsi. For Coca-Cola, this was more than a competitive nuisance. It was almost ideological damage. Because when your main rival wins the blind taste test, it does not only threaten sales, it wounds pride. And this is where large companies often begin to go wrong. They do not panic because they have already lost. They panic because they are forced, maybe for the first time, to imagine that losing is possible. From the outside, it looks like strategy. On the inside, it is often fear dressed up in corporate language. We need to adapt. We need to respond to the market. We need to modernize the product. All of those phrases sound sensible, but sometimes they are just polished versions of anxiety. Coca-Cola was still a giant, but doubt had entered the giant. And a giant that doubts itself is a dangerous thing, because it has enough money, influence, and confidence to make a truly massive mistake. At this point, Coca-Cola did what seemed at first glance completely professional. It turned to research. The company conducted nearly 200,000 taste tests. Executives wanted to know what people preferred, and the results looked highly convincing. The new, sweeter formula performed better than original Coke, and in some formats, better than Pepsi in short taste comparisons. And here lies the heart of the entire story. The problem was not that Coca-Cola trusted data. The problem was which data it chose to treat as decisive. The company measured people's reaction to a sip, but it did not measure their reaction to loss. It measured flavor, but it did not measure attachment. It measured what people might choose in an experiment, but not what they would fight for in real life. And those are two very different things. In a blind taste test, people sample liquid. In real life, they defend symbols. That is where Coca-Cola missed. It made a decision as if it were managing an ordinary consumer product, when in reality it was managing an object of cultural loyalty. And the more the research seemed to prove that the new formula was better, the more confidently the company moved toward the disaster waiting for it. Because sometimes data does not lie, it simply answers the wrong question. On April 23, 1985, Coca-Cola announced its new formula. It was the first major change to its flagship recipe in 99 years. The company introduced the reformulated drink to the public as a bold modernization of its core product. If you try to see the world through the eyes of Coca-Cola's executives at that moment, their logic is understandable. They did not think of themselves as damaging the brand. Quite the opposite. They likely believed they were protecting its future. The rival is gaining strength. Younger consumers are drifting away. The tests are troubling. So the answer cannot be nostalgia. The answer must be action. On paper, it looked almost exemplary. Flexibility, boldness, modernization, rational decision-making. But in stories like this, the most dangerous moment is when the logic inside the company completely diverges from the logic outside it. To Coca-Cola, launching New Coke was a product decision. To millions of consumers, it felt like an emotional insult. The company did not simply introduce a new flavor alongside the old one. It chose to replace the original. And that changed everything. Because if New Coke had arrived as an additional option, the reaction might have been mixed, maybe even curious. But when people are effectively told, the thing you have known for years is now gone, the issue stops being about taste. It becomes about permission. Who gave a corporation the right to tamper with something people already felt was part of their lives? At that moment, Coca-Cola was no longer just a company launching a new product. It was a company bold enough to rewrite a public habit. The backlash came quickly, loudly, and for many inside Coca-Cola, probably shockingly. Yes, some people liked the new drink. By itself, the flavor was not some monstrous failure. But that was never the real issue. The problem was that people had never asked for the original to disappear, and that distinction matters. The company thought it was arguing with the market over a recipe. In reality, it was arguing with people over memory. Coca-Cola was hit by waves of complaints. Its phone lines were flooded, letters poured in. Groups of angry consumers demanded the old formula back. Even Coca-Cola later acknowledged that its consumer research had failed to capture the depth of emotional attachment people felt toward the original drink. And here, a terrifying truth revealed itself, not just for Coca-Cola, but for every major corporation. Loyalty does not always show up clearly in a spreadsheet. In fact, you often see it most clearly only after you start destroying it. As long as the beloved product is still there, attachment feels quiet and invisible, but remove it, and that attachment can turn into outrage. People felt that something had been taken from them, not merely a taste, but a familiar certainty, a small domestic constant in daily life. And this reaction was more than a consumer tantrum. It was a revolt against the arrogance of a large system that had convinced itself it understood people better than people understood themselves. The ugliest part of a crisis like this is not just the scandal. It is the feeling that the company has suddenly lost its footing. For decades, Coca-Cola stood for confidence, stability, and control. But the new Coke episode suggested the opposite. Instead of strength, the public saw nervousness. Instead of confidence, defensiveness. Instead of an untouchable leader, a corporation so rattled by competition that it began changing its own face. And that may be one of the most expensive parts of the mistake. Not only because money was spent, not only because the launch became a public embarrassment, but because for a brief moment, Coca-Cola damaged the image of its own invincibility. People suddenly saw that even this brand could panic, even this giant could lose its sense of direction, even this symbol could become so fearful that it started imitating the logic of its rival. In a deeper sense, New Coke was not only a bad product decision, it was a public admission of internal insecurity. And for a great brand, those admissions can cost a fortune. On July 11, 1985,
Coca-Cola announced the return of the original formula under the name Coca-Cola Classic. It had been 79 days since the launch of New Coke. The company had effectively backed down under public pressure. It was a rare and dramatic moment. One of the biggest companies in the world was forced to admit, in effect, that it had misunderstood its own customers. And there is an important nuance here. The return of the original formula was not only a defeat, it was also a rescue, because Coca-Cola did something many companies failed to do in time. It stopped. It did not keep insisting that people would eventually get used to it. It did not dig itself deeper into its own certainty. It did not turn a mistake into a long war against its own audience. It backed down. Yes, with embarrassment. Yes, under ridicule. Yes, entering history as one of the most famous marketing failures ever. But it backed down in time. And that is what allowed it to preserve the most important thing of all, the emotional core of the brand. Sometimes admitting failure looks weak, but sometimes it is the only thing preventing total self-destruction. The story of New Coke matters not only because it is a great business drama from the 1980s, it matters because it contains a universal law. Large companies often do not begin to fail because they lack data. They begin to fail when they become too confident that data explains everything. Coca-Cola saw the numbers, it saw the taste tests, it saw the threat from Pepsi, and it drew a rational conclusion. But the rational conclusion was emotionally blind. The company decided that its power lay in the beverage formula, when its real power lay in the fact that millions of people had tied that beverage to their own lives, to childhood, to summer, to habit, to the feeling that some things in the world are supposed to stay the same. That is why this mistake was so expensive. Not because the company spent millions, not because the launch failed, not because people mocked it, but because for one brief moment, Coca-Cola forgot what it actually was inside the minds of its consumers. And that is the most dangerous kind of forgetting for any brand, because the market can forgive a bad product, it can forgive a weak campaign. Sometimes it can even forgive greed, but people rarely forgive a brand for taking away a piece of memory and calling it an improvement. And that may be Coca-Cola's most expensive lesson of all. Sometimes a company thinks it is updating a product, when in reality, it is breaking a ritual. And rituals, unlike formulas, are far more painful to change.